Welcome to What's Up With That, a podcast hosted by me, Don Brewington. What's Up With That is a podcast that seeks to delve into thoughtful or thought-provoking conversations and insights with experts in their fields. The desire is that they'll be offering of interesting conversations and opportunity for you, our listeners, to hear diverse perspectives. And in the process, our prayer is that you will begin to ask questions. And that's the kind of questions that will say, what's up with that? We are entering a new season. We have not been recording since November. It was a time of going into the holiday season. For me, it was a time of retiring and looking at doing new things, different ways. And so we took sort of a hiatus. But we're back. And we are starting a new season. In this new season, we want to do something a little different. We want to talk to experts in the field of religion, of theology. And what we want to do in this season is begin to engage our guests in theological conversations, looking at Christ of history, Christ of faith, looking at the concept, Christian concepts, right, that we've heard for years, that we are familiar with, but may not always fully understand. And so we want to dig into some of those theological concepts that are relevant for a Christian community. And on today, as we start again, I want to look at Christ of history, Christ of faith. We want to look at the doctrine of the Trinity and where that comes from. We want to look at the canon. And when I say canon, I'm talking about Bible. And the appropriate word is it's the canon. And how did that Bible come to be? A few things that we are looking to engage in this new season. On this evening, I have a special guest with me, and we're going to begin with the conversations about Jesus. And we don't want to dig into all that Jesus is. We want to look at Jesus, what we would say is the Jesus of history, that human person, that person who walked this earth. And here to engage in that conversation this evening is our special guest. He is none other than the Reverend Dr. Theron Jackson. He is pastor of Morning Star Baptist Church in Shreveport, Louisiana. Now, I can give you a rundown, but what I'm going to ask is that you'll help me welcome Reverend Dr. Theron Jackson.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, sir, and glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
And just for the record, during the election season, if you've watched some of our podcasts, you know that we did a podcast just before the election. Well, after the election, we also did one.
Right.
And it was with the Reverend Dr. Theron Jackson.
That's right.
And Reverend Jackson got gypped a little bit, and it was an amazing conversation. My videographer was not available, so I thought I could do it myself. And in doing it myself, we had wonderful video. It was very engaging.
Right.
But the audio did not take. So I apologize to you for that, sir. We have you back. Expect that conversation to be equally as fantastic, right, or even better. And this time, I got help.
Yeah.
So the audio
for that,
right? is gonna happen, and we're gonna be able to post this one.
Right.
But again, welcome, my brother.
Thank you
glad
so much.
Glad to see you back, and we didn't get to hear about you last go around. So tell folk a little bit about yourself.
Oh, man, listen, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to participate in what I think is it's going to be an informing, and I know it has been a wonderful podcast journey that you've been on. And I'm just privileged to be one of the legions in this journey. And so thank you, first and foremost. Man, I am in Shreveport, Louisiana. As you said, I'm born and raised in Louisiana. I'm from Southwest Louisiana, born and raised in Lake Charles, Louisiana. But I moved to Shreveport this year will be 34 years ago. I moved to Shreveport, so I've been there. I went to college and moved there. I started off my career in insurance and financial services. And, I was a church kid growing up in the church, but never had a desire to be a pastor or be in ministry in any way, shape, or form. And when I was 25, man, I was called into the ministry, preached my first sermon reluctantly, and that wasn't my trajectory. I had another life plan. And so I've been pastoring now. This year will make my 27th year pastoring, and I pastored 13 years at my first church, and I'm in my 14th year at the church where I am now at Morning Star. So Morning Star just happened to be the church I joined when I moved to Shreveport, and I wasn't a minister. I just a member of the church. Had no idea that 20 years later I go back to the church as a pastor. So life's come full circle from that ministry perspective. But our ministry has been a blessing to me. We are, I think paradigm shifting. We're doing things a little bit different in our ministry. Our ministry is community oriented, and we traditionally have been a worship centered ministry, and Lord's moved us away from that. The pandemic has helped us out tremendously, and we are invested in the community that we serve. We call it, the area is called Moortown. It's a very historic area in the city for us because it was one of the few incorporated areas that was purchased, incorporated by an African-American man. And so he felt like black people ought to have somewhere to live. Our church was planted there. This year will be 96 years. And they're in that community, And so we're going to make sure that the next 100 years going to be better for the community than they were even the past 100 years.
So and you're going to be there for the next 100 years,
No. I won't be. By no means do I have any illusions of being there for the next 100 years. I don't have illusions of being there for the next 10 years, honestly. So, but I want to be able to do in my season what it is that will make it smooth for the next person to come who's following me. And that's important to me as well. My legacy, I hope, will be the smooth transition and the upward trajectory of the person who follows me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think that's one of the greatest legacies. And as I have engaged in retirement, I think that's one of the greatest joys, right?
Absolutely.
To be able to be a part of getting the new chaplain.
Right.
For Houston Tillotson.
Right.
And setting it so that what I say is he can elevate.
Yes.
I think we've done some great things here.
Yes.
And to elevate will be easy because he doesn't have to come in.
Right.
He can come in, learn the lay of the land. I think that Nehemiah mentality. Right.
That's it.
Let's go. Let's survey the land.
You can build without having to do a foundation. Because you got a foundation already. And that's a blessing to have a legacy of someone who left a foundation. Now all he's doing is framing it up, taking it to the next level. Yeah, so it's a great blessing, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What did you do your seminary work?
So my seminary work is interestingly enough, at United Methodist Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, at the United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. And I was excited about my time. I clearly was blessed. My ministry and life changed as a result of that process. I'm obviously from the South. I didn't want to have an education that was steeped geographically in the South. Because as a Baptist, just the notion of Southern and Baptist together. I didn't want to. So it was a great experience. The late Dr. Charles Booth encouraged me to attend. I had some friends who attended United, and there is a great litany of who's who had gone to the school. So I'd heard of it, but I had never been to Ohio, that kind of scenario. And, I just trusted God, and it was a great process. I did my master's in divinity there in Dayton, and it was a wonderful experience and a ministry and life-changing experience for me. So, wonderful school, United Methodist. It was a wonderful school.
Familiar with it. Familiar with it. Yes. I probably could ask 100 questions about you. But we came to talk about
Jesus.
A
lot more important than me.
And as we lay the groundwork, I'm going to say most of where I'm looking to come from, is the Gospels.
Sure.
Right? I can appreciate what Paul said about Jesus, but sometimes I think we
Right.
get a little sidetracked.
Right.
Because Paul's talking about Jesus, and I have my own understanding that their task was to, once Jesus left this earth,
Right.
how do we keep his teachings alive?
Right.
How do we make those teachings relevant to where we are? And also, what does it mean now?
Right. Exactly right.
Understanding that in Jesus' death,
Right.
he died a Jew, he didn't die a Christian.
Exactly right.
Right? So what does that mean for us? And we'd like to hear it from the words of Jesus.
Right.
To get to see who he is based on his words and what he did.
Right.
Now, if you need to go outside, it's wonderful. But part of me says that some of those other writers had their issues too.
Right. Absolutely.
And so hopefully as we go through this new season, that we'll also be able to incorporate
Right.
who was Paul
Right.
and what was Paul about, right? So that we really can dig in and see where he's coming from and why he says much of what he says.
Right.
So without going too far, I want to actually go back to the very beginning. What we're looking at is the human Jesus, right? I was watching a podcast last night, and I almost thought to frame. They were talking about God. I'm of the mind that everybody ought to understand who God is, right? Maybe I might be wrong. I don't know, but certainly my take and my understanding is that word that we oftentimes stay away from. That Jesus is God incarnate, right?
Right.
It's I don't know if are you familiar with Green Pastures? It's an old play. Back in the 50s, I think, I forget the author, but it talks about heaven. It's a black heaven, right? They're talking about fish fries and all that kind of stuff going on, right?
Yeah.
God
My version of heaven.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's a delightful read, and never have seen it, but in terms of the read.
Right.
And it was that place where God saw all the things that was happening in the world, on the earth, very distraught, and said, you know what, I need to go down there and check it out myself. And for me, sort of, as we talk about the God incarnate,
Right.
is the God who said, you know what, it's a whole lot of stuff going on. I've been dealing with people for a long time.
Right.
I'm not bothered sometimes. I understand the devastations, but we've always had that, right?
Absolutely.
We've always had an amazing God who forgives, who repents, and what everybody else says, I don't know, but he forgives all of our sins, and he repents, and he restores, right? But I think for a moment, he got tired of restoring for a moment, so he said, you know what, I got to go down and check this out myself. So we get God incarnate, and that God incarnate is in the person of Jesus the Christ. And then we say he's 100% human and he's 100% divine. We want to look at the 100% human. What is it that you say, and even looking from his birth and how he was born into the world.
Right.
Who is this Jesus? Not the spiritual.
Sure.
But who is this man Jesus?
Yes. I think we can overlook that because we are always seduced into the notion of just the Jesus, the theos, right?
Right.
And we dismiss the notion of the reality of the anthropos. And so when we do that, then we don't see Jesus who takes a bath.
Okay.
Jesus who uses the restroom, the anthropos was not a false anthropos. And because the scriptures, particularly the Gospels, give us a snapshot. We don't see every day in the life of Jesus.
Yes.
We see him one day born, we see him another day at 12, we see him 18 years later at 30. No one would argue that that's not snapshots, right?
That's not snapshots. And
so,
then if we look at look at the life, it's really just a little bit more than a week.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's really not a total picture of his total life.
Exactly. Most of the Gospels, certain portions of the Gospels, depending on which one you look to, spend most of their, if you talk about the length of Scripture, a lot of it is spent on the last week, 10 days of his life, right? And so you see a lot of that delving in, because that's what is the pivotal part that is all penultimate to what is the crucifixion and the resurrection, right?
And so it connects you to that. That is going to be the spiritual religious.
Exactly. It contextualizes what he's about to do. But I think in all of that, the backdrop of it is never forgetting the incarnational spirit of what's happening. God, and when we say God, I mean all of him, right? Triune God,
right,
has this notion of ever and progressive revelatory incarnation, right?
Okay.
And so everything is incarnation. The world is void and he speaks into it.
Okay.
And his voice now begins to do something because his voice gets into the earth, right?
Okay.
He creates Adam from the dust of the ground, and his breath goes into Adam. It's a continual incarnational theme when you start thinking about who God is. And so the big swaths of it, then Jesus is born.
Okay.
Jesus, God in flesh.
Okay.
But then Jesus goes away, Holy Ghost comes. Now it's the God in church, and the people who would become the church, right? And so all of this is a consistent incarnational kind of a scenario that we see God always getting into things, right? So when we talk about the human, the anthropos, Jesus, I think if we're not careful, some people think it to be a sacrilegious thing. But Jesus is the only person who was ever what one might call theanthropic, in the sense that he's not 50-50. He is 100% theos and 100% anthropos, and he is this God-man like this, right? And so, but what makes it interesting is when you start to just look at him through the lens of humanity.
Yeah, and that's where we want to go this evening, right?
Yes.
Because even I think if we really we can begin to understand his humanity even in his birth, right? I think I've titled this, "Who is that baby with no earthly father?" Right. Somewhere we all have stepfather. A whole lot of us. I have stepfather, right? A lot of stepfathers. Joseph was a stepfather,
right?
So there's an element as we look at the human Jesus that is not, we don't look at. But if we look at his birth, understanding his incarnation, it's God incarnate.
Right.
What does his birth say about his humanity? And not only his being in the manger, but in his birth, there was a lot of hell going on.
Oh yeah.
Right. So what can you say about his birth and his coming into the world and what was going on that in some way begins to crystallize his humanity? Yeah.
So I think you start to think about this notion that Jesus is born. I think, again, I'd like to lay a foundation that suggests that all of Scripture and all of time and all of creation, throughout everything that we've ever considered to be time, it's always been about two kingdoms, right? There's always been this notion of two kingdoms. There is the kingdom of empire, and then there's the kingdom of shalom. These kingdoms have coexisted from the creation of the earth to the fall of man, the whole nine, right? And so there's always in the theme in life of these two kingdoms. And Jesus is born at a time where it appears that the kingdom of empire has overshadowed significantly the kingdom of shalom. And so now when this light comes into this dark space, they say to the shepherds who are abiding by their sheep at night, tonight is born to you a Savior who is Christ the Lord, right? And peace, goodwill, all the things that the kingdom of shalom has to usher in is being born tonight, right? Okay. Not because the kingdom never existed, but because the kingdom was apparently overshadowed in a significant way. And now God's saying in the fullness of time, then incarnate, here comes Jesus, because he's got something to do. And it's going to be about the kingdom that is empire is a human kingdom. And God's coming now to challenge the human kingdom with a human king. And he brings them into this realm. And we see now it is not anymore this ecclesiastic, it's not anymore this extraterrestrial battle that we like to think about, God and Satan out in this space we can't see. Now it's at a very human level. And there is Satan as the power that is behind the curtain, right? And all of these people, whether you use Pharaoh, whether you use Nebuchadnezzar, whoever you want to use, empire has always been an issue. Babylon, all empire, all representing empire. And now Jesus, right? To suggest that we're going to set the kingdom in order. And now this kingdom has come to no longer ever be overshadowed again, right? And this light has come. And darkness, I like to believe that darkness is not a thing, right? It's like you can't create darkness. It wasn't made out of something. Darkness is simply the best we can do to describe. It's like tomorrow, right?
Okay.
Tomorrow is a psychological concept for planning, right? That's the way you set your calendar, your days. Tomorrow I'm gonna do something. Planning, because you never get there. Because when you go to bed tonight and you wake up, you're not in tomorrow. You wake up, you're today.
You wake up here today.
So it's a concept. And so I believe the darkness is a concept as well, in the sense that the darkness is not a thing. It's a construct or a definition of what it means to be absent of light. Okay. Right? And so God now in this situation, Jesus comes to penetrate this darkness, but in a human form, because the battle is going to always be spiritual, but it's going to be fought now on a human level.
Okay. So as we look at him on that human level, who is he? And I mean, and for me, as I say, starting with his birth, because when he comes into the world, right, he's coming in without an earthly father. Right. So he's coming in with a stepfather, a stepfather who, like anybody else's stepfather, if he's a good stepfather, right, because you have good stepfathers, you have bad stepfathers. I was blessed. My stepfather, I don't call stepdad, right? He's my pops.
Right.
He came into our lives when I was about 10. He provided. He taught me what it meant to be a man. Engaged in conversations. I mean, right. He was that model.
Right.
So that Jesus also had a father who modeled life for him.
Right.
He had a mother who modeled life for him. When he came into the world, this Jesus and that manger story that we celebrate at Christmas time wasn't that pretty.
Right.
Right?
No.
The manger story is a sweet story.
Yeah.
And the son and the shepherds, it was some stuff going on. And you had somebody, because of a story that they heard, they didn't know the truth of it.
Right.
In fact, no one really ever really understood. Right. Didn't know the truth of it, but taking his life. Children, innocent children who were killed.
Right.
Right? There would be weeping and gnashing of teeth and killed because they couldn't find out who this so-called king was.
The threat of this king, right?
Right?
Right.
So we're going to kill everybody who's a certain age.
Right.
In our humanity, how does that speak to us? So we're coming into a world that, we want to talk about how bad the world is.
Right.
World... Maybe people make it good. There's always been stuff going on.
Right.
He comes into the world in the midst of stuff.
Yeah, he's born in a time where, again, so let's talk about Jesus. First of all, he's a baby born into a family.
Yes.
In the culture that sometimes we read our culture over the scripture. Jesus didn't come from a culture like ours. And so when we honor his context, Jesus first is born into a family with a mother and father. They are in a collectivist society, and he is a part of now this collectivist. He is the first son, which carries with it something in the collectivist culture. But he's a part of the unit for a mother, father, and son. He wouldn't have known anything about the notion of a stepfather. It's a father, a mother, and a son. He is going to be born into a scenario where he doesn't know people are being killed behind him. His dad's going to get a word to take him down to Egypt and hide him there for a couple years. Meanwhile, the insecurity that's going on, again, in the human mind of this king is causing real human death on the earth.
Right.
Jesus, who is a boy, is growing up. We know very little about him, except for the fact that we know about his tradition. We know that he has brothers and sisters as well.
Okay.
He is the eldest son, and he lives in a place that is occupied by Roman colonialization, for lack of a better term.
And he was also born into a certain culture.
Yes,
I mean,
he's Jewish.
He's Jewish.
He's Jewish.
He's Jewish.
He's born in Palestine.
And that has
Jewish,
implications
yes,
about who he is as a person.
Right. But among the Jewish people, he is also special because of what people don't think would make him special. And that is, if somebody calls Joseph his stepdaddy, don't forget, Joseph has to go to Bethlehem. The reason Joseph has to go to Bethlehem is because you got to go to the city of your father, your family's city. It's David's city. It's Bethlehem. Joseph's from the lineage of David. They're not nobodies. David's pretty significant in Jewish culture, right?
Okay.
So Jesus is not born, while he is born to a poor family from an economic perspective, he's not born into a family of no status from a Jewish perspective, because he's from David's lineage. He's a part of the tribe of Judah, right?
Okay.
And so he has to go to Joseph has to go to Bethlehem. And so we start to see the implication.
For the case of the census.
Yes, and so who Jesus is. He's a part of a family, a collective, that's a part of a larger collective. And so even in a larger context, he is born he's Jewish, but he's not just Jewish. He's from the tribe of Judah. And he is in this religious, in this religion or family, if you will. And so there are a lot of implications to his birth that would make him a person who would spend time in the temple, a person who grew up, what we like to say in our own culture, in church, right?
Yeah.
And
he's a church boy.
Right. He's going to a yeshiva. He's going to school somewhere in that culture. And he is growing up as a Jew in that culture. And so we have to really fall back on what we understand about the Old Testament to see how Jesus grew up, right? Because the Bible doesn't give us a lot of information.
Okay. So when we say the Old Testament, can we break that down? Say
yes.
Yes, we have to understand the culture.
The culture.
Because oftentimes when we say we need to understand the Old Testament, we still, even though many say, well, you don't interpret it, it's what it says.
Yeah.
But we understand that if we look at Old Testament, that was a period and certain things were happening that was culturally relevant. Right? And so then if we just point to Old Testament without understanding, we're talking about a culture, because that culture then has certain implications.
Right. But they would have, so people, the Hebrew Bible, right? The Torah.
The Old Testament.
When we speak to that, we see the Bible very often in our culture as language books, right? And so we know right offhand the Old Testament's Hebrew, New Testament's Greek. Well, those are the languages, but language means nothing without culture overlaying or even underlying. Because to know that it says these words, and sometimes we feel real good about the fact that we can say it in Greek, we know the Hebrew terminology, but the truth is to know that without knowing it. I'm from Louisiana, and if you're from 3 different parts of Louisiana, we can talk about one word that means something different to all 3 of those cultures. And so if you don't get the cultural backdrop of what so you got to know that Jesus was born into an honor shame culture. He's born into a collectivist culture. We are in an individualist culture. We live in a rule of law culture. Jesus didn't come from rule of law. He didn't come from individuals. He came from a collectivist culture.
So you said collectivist culture. What do you mean?
I mean, so in a collectivist culture, individualism means nothing. Okay. That it is no I, me, my, me. It has nothing to do with, it's not a part of the value system. So when you read people in the Hebrew Bible, and even in the New Testament, you find as well that nobody is associated with themselves as themselves. Okay. You start talking about Saul of Tarsus. You start talking about Elisha, the Tishbite. You start talking about Joshua, son of Nun. Everybody's got to have a connection, because nobody is out here doing what we do, individualizing, right?
Okay. So community then.
Yes, the
community culture has value.
There is interestingly enough, more than that, it is what you said almost as a double entendre, because there are values that create the group you're in.
Yes.
And you're in the group you're in because of the values. So if your family if you talk about the family you're born, that's the first collective you're in, right? And then you can choose different collectives, but in order to be in that collective, you have to also assent to the values of that collective, right? Okay. So when Jesus comes, Jesus says that I'm coming to start a new group. And if anybody's going to be in my group, let me give you the values of my new group, okay. Right?
So eventually, I mean, basically what we're saying is that Jesus, because he started a movement.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
He started a movement.
Yes.
It was something different. Right? Jesus at that point would have, let's see, who can we consider radical? Let's go Martin Luther King, right? It is just about King Week. He was radical, right? So much so that his value was not appreciated until after his death. The same could be said about Jesus, really, right? Jesus came, and he came opposing what was traditional.
Right. Creating a new value set. And you only get in the group if you assent to the value set. You can't just hang out with the group. You've got to believe. In John 6, you find people who say, I can't get with this. And the Bible says there were some disciples who never followed him no more because he said, these sayings are too hard. We can't get with this, right?
So we can say he was a good teacher.
Yes. As a rabbi, excellent teacher. But he wasn't just teaching. He was teaching the values of a new kingdom, right? The values of a new group. And if you're going to join the group, you know, in our group, we get hit on the right cheek, we turn the left, right? It doesn't make sense. It's the juxtaposition of his kingdom where the burdens are light. You know, the yoke is easy. And he said, and it's hard to understand because he is ushering in a group that's going to be some new values that don't make sense in juxtaposition to what the world's values are. Because remember, it's always two kingdoms. And people are accustomed to subscribing. And we will even read the Empire Kingdom in the scripture and try to make that Jesus is not talking about empire. He's talking about shalom, and it's totally different.
And that I think begins to move into the Christ of faith,
the spiritual Jesus.
Right. So I want to just for a moment pull us back.
Right.
To the Jesus of history.
Right. So you use Jesus the term radical.
Who walked.
Right.
But many would not have seen those of his culture.
Right.
Did not see the other implications that we see later on. Right.
Right.
What they saw was a good teacher. What they saw was a good teacher. So what we do understand is that what he was a good teacher. What he was, and I don't know.
But he was a carpenter as well. He was a mason, if you will, because.
So he worked like everybody else. He had a craft, and it was a kind of craft that allowed him to move about.
Right. Because we see carpentry in our world versus his world. In his world, carpentry was stone masonry. It was not wood and building cabinets and that kind of thing. He lived in a different culture than us. So it's really stone masonry, those kind of things. So Jesus wasn't either physically a weakling. He's not going to work the way he worked and be this little tiptoe to the tulip, long hair, blue-eyed. So it's not the historical Jesus, right? It is some priestly form of a Jesus that people paint. But the real Jesus got his hands dirty. The real Jesus worked with his daddy, with the family, helped his mama raise his brother and sister.
The family business.
Yes, and helped his mom around the house. He's the oldest child. He's got responsibilities to his younger brothers and sisters. So him being a good teacher may started in the house with the kids there, right? Sharing with them before he ever goes into a temple. We see him at 12 talking in a temple. But he's got brothers and sisters already by that time, right? And so we miss that part of Jesus sometimes when you see that. And then again, there's some deuterocanonical books that talk a little bit about maybe Jesus when he was growing up, and there's some things about when he was in school and those kind of things. We don't read that much in the canon, but we do find that there's some deuterocanonical material that you find that do talk about some of those things. We're really skeptical about those things, but they do exist, right? So he was very human in the sense that Jesus ate with his brothers and sisters, he played with them, all those things that we don't see happening in his life because they don't really seem to have a salvific undertone. And it seems like the canonization of Jesus is to be sure that we undergird him with a salvific undertone. But that takes you back to that faith Jesus versus the human, because there's not a lot about the human Jesus.
But I think
Scripture.
it's enough there.
Yeah, but this culture is really
to help
what
us
it's about.
understand what it means to be human.
Yes.
And to understand in our humanity, there is an understanding, and I'm trying not to go to the God side because I really want to focus on Jesus, but there's an understanding because this God incarnate came as 100% human. Right. Who was he as that 100% human? What did it mean? And somewhere there's some value in that. The value is not only in the salvific piece.
Right.
The value is also in that humanity of Jesus, what he did, how he did, right? I like what you said a few minutes ago. He wasn't no whimp.
No.
Right?
No.
He also was not that, we like the rosy, the nice Jesus who's going to make everybody good. And
pacifist.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's understand that Jesus got ticked, right?
I was about to say, I think about these different occasions. You talk about humanity, purely humanity. He's hungry. And he says, give me some of these figs. And no figs on the tree. The frustration that follows the hunger, right?
And that's a human frustration, right?
Human frustration. And nothing about God and all of that.
It's a human frustration.
Except for the fact that we don't associate that with God, but that's God too, right? But in his humanity, remember the part that we can't forget as we do the bifurcation of the faith and the humanity is that humans were made in the image and in the likeness of God. Okay. So the human things we do got a God hint to it anyway, right?
Should.
It should.
And
he's hungry, sees a tree, desires it, frustrated because he doesn't get anything from it, right?
Okay. So one quality was this Jesus who gets frustrated.
Exactly.
That was one instance of his frustration. Another instance, and I believe he had some sense of sarcasm, right? When the brother brings him. Brings his son to him. He had sent the disciples out. They're supposed to do the healing, and he taught them well. He showed them what they're supposed to do. The brother brings his son and says they couldn't do it. How long? Right?
Man,
how long? Y'all can't get this?
Exactly.
And I believe that it was an attitude. I believe he was frustrated, and I believe that when he said it, he didn't say it. Well, how long are y'all going to do that?
Yeah.
I
really think the harder part for many people reading in our time and day, it's really harder to try to point out the spiritual than it is the human, because he gets ready to go to sleep when he gets on a boat. He got a pillow, tired, going downstairs, and I'm going to sleep. Human, right?
Human.
Frustrated with these guys when come on, man, right? He does. He has emotions that are obviously all human when he chooses not to add guilt to grief. Okay. When a scantily clad woman is brought into the church at a teaching time and these people set her up and he doesn't say a word and he writes on the ground and then he finally says, whoever, he's without saying, you throw the first stone. And nobody does anything. But beyond nobody doing anything, that wasn't the most important part. He then waits until everybody leaves, right? He's concerned about this woman to the extent that he waits till everybody leaves and says to this woman, where your accusers? She says, he said, I don't accuse you either. He said, now go and sin no more. He didn't say what you did was cool. He says, but go and sin no more. You see, the grace is coming in, but he cared enough about her as a human to not put her on blast, right? And so he's got that. He's emotional. He's lost a friend. Right? Yeah, he lost a friend who dies. Word comes to him that his homeboy dies, who every time he goes through that city of Bethany, that's what he don't go to Holiday Inn. He's staying at their house with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And the word is, your boy is dead, man.
Yeah.
Jesus seems cavalier because the disciples talk to him and he says, hey, he's asleep. They say, well, he's asleep. We don't need to go. Okay, he's dead. So, well, if he's dead, we don't need to. They get there, and what does Jesus do? Jesus weeps, right? Because a lot of people like to say he's weeping because of the people, but this is friend.
Yeah, but if you read that text, what it says is that they came and mourned.
Yes.
And he looked at Mary in her sorrow,
yes,
and he wept.
Right.
It was not about, if you read the text, I had some in my, I left my Bible because I was going to use my phone. My phone is being used with the sound today.
Yeah.
So, but if we read the text,
John 10,
clearly, we understand that when he looked at the mourners and he looked at Mary, he wept.
Human connection.
Human connection and the compassion.
Yes.
The compassion.
That's exactly.
And he demonstrates that compassion on a number of levels, even with sinners. Maybe he's not so unlike us, right? The two instances, they would constantly get him, right? He called upon Matthew's call. He was not above associating with those folk that some folk call sinners, right? You can't associate. He was not above. He had the kind of compassion because he understood that if he was going to share the gospel he had, his teachings, and he was a good teacher, that all folk mattered. The compassion extended to all of humanity. Why is he in there eating with sinners? I didn't come to heal those who were well.
Yes.
The sinners. Right?
And he only says that to them for them to see the contrast, because think about this. We talk about Jesus wasn't above being with sinners. Well, who else did he have? That's all that was on earth was sinners. He's the only person in the whole earth realm that when we account for sin, who's not. Now you got people who don't consider themselves sinners because they're religious, but all they were was sinners. You know, it was those who were not arrogant in their sin, and who wasn't trying to be religious either. He dealt with them, and those were those folks, the sick. And you talk about the well, they weren't literally well, right? They were well in their own heads and in their mind, and they weren't ready yet for that, right? And he says, these people who are close to the ground, they got real problems, and if somebody enters into that problem with them, they're human, and I understand humanity, right?
I understand.
Zacchaeus, come on down from here, right? And I'm gonna go to your house tonight, and everybody's watching. Okay, I got to eat somewhere. It goes in there and eats. And it says, and he eats with sinners. Well, sinners talking about him, right?
So perhaps that, and as I look at the prodigal, right? You had two prodigals in that story. The one who stayed home was as much of a prodigal as one who left.
Sure.
He stayed for the wrong reasons, right? And perhaps we have all of that going on.
Right.
Some of the and for me the implications of that human Jesus, right? Not the Jesus that we and I really do. I guess I'm really working hard. I'm sorry of staying with that human Jesus.
Oh no. So I think all of it is
so that we can pull the.
I give you this example. He's angry when he goes into the temple. Very human emotion. People misappropriate his anger, and I think that's when we start to miss the Jesus who we really need to see, because Jesus is not. I ask people at our church and places I go teaching lessons, say, why did Jesus why did he kick over the table? Why did he knock all the stuff over? And most people tell me the same thing, because they were money changes in the temple of the church. I said, money change in the temples is part of the Levitical priest construct. They're supposed to be there because people are bringing all kinds of coins and drachma and talents, but you only can bring shekels inside. Somebody got to change that. Those people are not there doing something illegal. They're doing something that's set up in the temple. Jesus is not upset with those folks. Jesus is upset with those folks, those priests who have become aristocratic, who are now temple taxing the people on top of the Roman tribute, Jesus identified with people who are being taken advantage of, who are being played, if you will. His heart is connected to theirs. The hungry who got to eat 2 fish, 5 loaves of bread. He identifies with more humanity because all he's got there is humanity. And Jesus is identifying his humanity with that. And I'm not suggesting that he's not, again, he is spiritual, but it's his humanity that can feel for people that way. And so when you see him knocking over tables and turning over this, and he's angry, that's a human emotion.
It's a human emotion.
Yeah, it's very human emotion.
Human emotion.
And, I think the more and more we see him, we start to close the distance between us and him. Because
if we
I
can
get
see
mad.
him.
Yes, because I get mad.
So often we're so busy being spiritual and holy that we don't see this human Jesus, right? The frustration, the anger, right? Certainly there was some anger when he found himself in the temple, and he's going to heal someone, and he understands that folk around are waiting.
Yes. Yes.
But it's also indicative of him doing the things that he believed to be right that were not traditional.
Yes.
Love.
Not natural.
It's in Mark. It's also in Matthew when he says, "You hypocrites." What you really following are your rules that you laid down. Right. Because a lot of what you had there was some 365 or so, added about 10. At 10. Come on now. But you're following. You hypocrites.
And he's clear about who he is, who one might argue the enemy. I don't know that I want to use that terminology, but the other kingdom, he's clear about who he is in battle with, empire. And for example, I give this example because I think it's important for us to see that Jesus is establishing kingdom. And one day, and noticing how his life pattern and rhythm was, they see that he prayed a lot. His disciples, people followed him who quite frankly didn't get it in his lifetime either. He says to them, "Have I been so long with you?" On the night before, right? And so they didn't get it either. But he one time he is there, and it's interesting that when he is getting ready to say a word to them about, I think, some of the most important things of who he is, right? But he is radical.
He's radical.
He's radical. And people have painted him as this pacifist, but he's radical. And perhaps one of the most radical statements he ever makes is in response to a question: teach us to pray. And when Jesus responds to them, he puts them in what they might feel is a very awkward situation, because he's given us terroristic language. He's given us, what one might think is mutiny language, right? We're getting ready to get in trouble because he says, first of all, I'm not coming at you Jewish. So he doesn't say the father of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, but he opens his prayer universally and says, "Our Father." It's like amazingly inclusive, right? Which art in heaven. Then he gets into the dangerous territory because he says, "Hallowed be thy name." And if we were there, everybody's like, shh, right? Because he lives his entire life from birth to resurrection in a place that is occupied by Rome, under the thumb of Roman oppression, he and his people. And when you are under the thumb of Roman oppression and colonialization, there ain't but one name to be hallowed in that territory, and that is Caesar. Jesus stands there and says, "Hallowed be thy name," and then turns around and says, "Thy kingdom come." You mean, well, certainly we ain't gonna be praying this out loud, huh, Jesus? Because you are now insurrectionists when you begin to use that language. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as if we're not following somebody else's lead now. You're giving us that direction, right? And all of those things he begins to say, very radical statements. He talks about the things that are in the lives, human lives of individuals, debt, right? We sometimes change it to trespasser, but forgive us our debt, Why? Because that has been a big thing around the necks of people there. They can't wait for every 7 years, man, get Jubilee, just try to clear this up, because they've got to borrow money to pay the temple tax, borrow money to pay the tribute to Rome, and they don't make much money. They're peasants largely. And Jesus has said, forgive us our debts, we've got debt. But he goes on and says, and give us this day what is not the right of poor people, daily bread. He's controversial. Public policy issues. Jesus is talking about daily bread and lead us not into, and anybody think about the temptation, right? And I think we think temptation as a sin. And I think he's got Levi standing right there. He sees Zacchaeus and others say, lead us not into temptation. What is the temptation? To abandon what we've been walking with and to go sell out our people and work for Rome and do what other people are doing, right? And we don't want the temptation. And deliver us from the evil one. How all of my life growing up, I just knew that was the devil in the prayer. It's not Jesus talking about Caesar, the evil one, right? That emperor, because I know what kingdom I'm up against. It is the kingdom of empire versus the kingdom of shalom.
So can we also say that as we look at this human Jesus, that Jesus was also political?
Yes.
Subtly so.
No, literally. When you talk about establishing a kingdom, that is fully political. Because we already got a kingdom. And what about Caesar? And Jesus talks about the kingdom of God is like a man. He keeps giving a juxtaposition to the kingdom you've been focused on and fooled to believe this is what kingdom looks like.
And part of the reason why majority of Jews, because there are Jews who believe in the human Christ, right? Well, that's going spiritual, so I don't want to go there right now. Can I ask a question? We're looking at this human Jesus. We've talked about some of his attributes. He's compassionate, right? And that compassion extended to all. It extended to anyone who was hurting, who was suffering. It extended to those who didn't know what they need, quote unquote, sinners. Right, Mary Magdalene, when she wiped she's a prostitute, right?
Right.
Steeped in sin. She wiped his feet with her hair, and all he said when they came at him, and when they came at both of them, maybe, right? Came for both of them. Do you know? Whenever you tell this story, what she has done has been the greatest thing. A sinner.
Yeah. Everywhere the gospel is preached.
Has been. Everywhere the gospel is preached, she will be part of the story, right? Compassion. We understand in his humanity, he got angry. Right. We understand that he hurt, right? In all of he was political. Right. I want to ask two questions. One at a time. And I might forget the second one because I don't have it written down.
That's right. I'm all right.
This human Jesus, what was the motivation behind his death?
So, for the people who put him to death? Because Jesus wasn't trying to die, but he'd come to die, right? Humanity. People put in his face, very human, an opportunity before he dies. You may remember the text, he has been famous, but word on the street is his folks about to sell him out. That Jewish people, his religious folk, are about to be in conspiratorial alliance with the Roman government. The Roman government don't care nothing about religion, but they do care that somebody's saying they're a king and they're going to be an insurrectionist, right? And so there are a group of Greeks who come to him one day and say, hey man, they tell the disciples we would see Jesus, right? And they want to talk to Jesus because they want to say to him, Jesus, man, you smart. You build, everywhere you go, you attract crowds. Got these fellas following you, but you're the man. If you come over to Athens, bro, you could get some educated disciples, write some books, retire, do some other things, and certainly not have to worry about these people about to sell you out. And Jesus tells him, that's why I came. I came to die, right? And I know I'm here. But they were seeking to attract him to Athens.
Okay.
And Jesus was able to shun the allure and the attraction to Athens. And in a very human way, I like to talk to African Americans about following Jesus, that sometimes we get allured away from our communities because we end up going to Athens, right? For opportunity. But Jesus says, I'm here for my people. And for this people that I come. And he is human, and he's doing what he's doing for other human beings as well. And so I think it's important to see that in his humanity, his motivation wasn't dying, because even on the night that Gardner Taylor calls of impending confrontation, right? He's praying, if it's possible, let me keep on moving forward. 100% human, right?
100% human.
And then something that is that spirit of him says, nevertheless, not my will, because my will is very human at the moment.
Okay.
He says,
so his humanity says that some things I don't want to do.
Yes.
Okay. How about what are your thoughts? You mentioned that this human Jesus was radical, and in his radicalness, he also was in many ways political, right? Do we not see that when we have them in the court, and actually when the high priests meet and Herod and all of those folk, because he was gaining so much popularity, right? Folk were following him. He was a leader.
Absolutely.
Right? But he was also a scary leader, because if he got too much of a following, it would impede upon the clout that the others had. And remembering Caiaphas, when he says, as he's talking to them, before they arrest him, he says, it's expedient that he should die. Because if you take him out, we don't lose our places.
Right.
Right? So somewhere is there not a sense that as much as it had spiritual implications, that was also a political death?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think one could argue that it is not. I think it is everything about him. My perspective is a little different than a lot of people, but I think everything about him was political in a sense, right? Of how we define politics. He is in this at this time that you speak of. They want to kill him because he's too much. He's doing things that taking crowds from them. He seems to be a person who, where does he get this authority? Where does he get this power? And he's coming in, establishing a new king. They want to get Rome in alliance with them. Rome could care less, right? Pay your taxes on time. We don't care about what you're doing.
But they were cool,
church,
right? It was the Jews who were living there, and they had clout.
Right, and they were religious
living
leaders.
Comfortably.
Yes, aristocratically.
Yes.
They got to go.
They was living uptown.
Right. And his ways.
Living well, and they didn't want their positions compromised.
Starkly different from them, and it was catching on. And people, it just made sense. People say he speaks as one having authority, right? For them, their authority came from their titles. He didn't have a title, and yet he had authority. Because
and yet he was able to get people to follow him.
Yes, because he's speaking the truth to people. He's very influential. That's human. He's very influential, and people are following a human being. They're not following a spiritual person. They're following a human being, right? Yes. And this human Jesus is leading them in pathways that human beings would do. Like, and they're shocked when he does something that seems not human. You're out there walking on this water we thought it was a ghost, right? Because that's not human. We're only used to seeing you as human. We see him as super spiritual. They see him only as human his entire life. And they said in the boat one day when he says peace and he says be still, he speaks to the wind and the waves. Gardner Taylor says go to sleep on the bosom of his gentle command. He says be still. And the disciples sit there in the boat, been with him every day. He said, what manner of man is this? What kind of human is what they say can do this kind of stuff? Okay.
So he became influential in the powers he had.
Yes.
How he used them.
Right.
I'm going to ask, and I'm not sure what our time is. What's our time like, sir?
Yes.
Does that mean 15 left?
15 left. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm asking about time and all of that stuff because we didn't get the appropriate SD card, and so we may have to cut it shorter than we'd like. I want to ask, as I think say 15 minutes, because I believe that too often we don't see the historical Jesus. We don't see that man, and I'm going to use the word, he's my brother, right? Generally, he's not my father, he's my brother.
Right.
So we don't oftentimes see this brother of ours in his humanity. And oftentimes, I think the struggle is rough because we don't see the humanity of this man Jesus, right? And so then it becomes difficult and impossible. And we understand that from the spiritual side, we will go into the he was without sin, right? But in his in his humanity, he did some things that, I'm going to stop for a second, right? I'm going to ask you, what are the implications of this human Jesus as we look at, I'm going to use the word canon for right now.
Sure.
Right? As we look at canon, as we look at New Testament canon, where we find Jesus.
Right.
Right? What are the implications of this human Jesus to those who seek to live a good, wholesome Christian life?
Sure. So I think we see a progressive revelation of God. Don't forget the incarnation. It is God in human form, right? And in human form, he is still God. But every human form, even before Jesus, was still made in the image and the likeness of God. God says, I want to make sure that I reveal that this is a progressive revelation, because he's going to do what no other human could do, right? 2 men ever, no daddy. 2, Adam, the first Adam, and the last Adam, right? And so Jesus comes, but in a very human way, God is revealing himself in humanity. So God is triune in nature, right? God in office as well, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So I remember people who struggle with saying, they'd be offended by you calling him your brother.
But he
is God.
The Bible will call him, he's your brother.
And so what happens is,
you have one father, and Jesus is not, and part of my problem, right? Because we want to make, they are the same, but as we look at the entity, they're very different. Yeah. And they have different roles and different functions.
Right. So, exactly right. And I think, but we make it too deep, and Jesus becomes a further revelation of God like this. You have people who they're not seeking Jesus. They trivia buffs, right? And they just want to trivialize and ask you questions. So I had a person ask me one day something that helped me understand the progressive revelation of God in humanity. And he said, how are you going to be a daddy and a son? It's his son, he's going to be a dad. And he said, so I said, listen, we're made in the image and the likeness of God, right? And so as you sit here right now, here you are, I mean, you're at least 3 people sitting in that one chair. But somebody looking may say, no, it's just one person. You can't. You're at least 3 people sitting right there. If your parents were alive, if your parents are alive, and I asked them to come here today, I say to your father or mother, who is that? They said, it's my son. And I say to your wife, come here. Who is that? She say, oh, that's my husband. I say to your children, come here. Who is that? Say, oh, that's my daddy. Hold on. How can he be daddy, son, husband? And he never moved. And yet he's all of those things. And so it's very simple, because we can be that, and we're made in the image and the likeness of God. Those are titular, right? It's this notion of who am I to whom, right? And in relationship to others, I become what I am in relationship to other people. And God is who he is, dependent on the relationship with whomever it is. You follow me? And so we act like we struggle with the Trinity and the triune nature of God. That's because we try to get too deep. And God says, I use the simple thing to confound the wise, right? And it's just that simple. The personhood of God, I can't argue that that's impossible, it's tough, but I can sit here and call you three different things right now, and you haven't even changed clothes.
Yeah, and while I agree, I think perhaps some of that challenge is it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very, very simple. But somewhere it calls us to put it out there sectionally, right? Because sometimes when we give it all, it's too much and it's confusing and I don't really understand.
Right.
But when I give chunks of it, the reason to take a human Jesus, apart from the Jesus of faith, right? Because this human Jesus gives us an example of what we can be. Because he's demonstrated that, right? And I agree wholeheartedly. I think sometimes we miss the boat because we're talking about a whole lot of other stuff, but Jesus was relational. I'm staying away from the faith. I'm gonna stay away from faith, okay? I'm purposely, you know, and it's tempting to go there, right?
It's hard to bifurcate it.
But I'm gonna catch it. There is something to be learned from the humanity of Jesus and understanding that he was 100%, and that 100% made him like me.
Right.
So it begins to help me understand what I can do, because then he becomes the example.
So I think it's important for people to understand. You said the word you said just now. He's like me. The important word to me is
I'm like him. How is that?
Either way, the important word is like. There is not a duplication. There is an imitation at every level. Man was made not God, but in the image and the likeness of God. So as we compare attributes, we can compare similar, that we are like God. We are not God, but we are like God. Jesus, in being human and incarnation, we use the word Christian, and ever since I was a kid, we say, what does the word Christian mean? We say being Christ what? Like, right? Not being Christ, being Christ-like. The term like suggests that there are some similarities, but also limitations.
Okay.
Right? There is an imitation because I acknowledge the limitation, right? And so I am not Jesus. I'm trying to be like Jesus. And so this notion of likeness. And so when man is made in the image and the likeness of God, he is made intelligent like God. Not intelligent as God. He's made intelligent like God. And when he creates that being, when he uses Christ as incarnate, we who follow him, we have God's Spirit, we have the Comforter, we have the Holy Spirit resident in us. But if we don't make him president in us, then we'll only have the potential. And when we let him lead us, we have the potential to be like Jesus. We cannot be Jesus, but we be like him. And so I think what's really important is that when you get the word like, you also get the rhythm that we like to call discipleship. Because when I disciple somebody, I'm not trying to get them to be me. I'm trying to get them to be like me. And this progressive revelation of incarnation also has with it limits, right? And so the likeness is important, that we don't forget that. So
you're saying that
come short, but you're built to come short, because you're not built to be that which you're imitating. You're built to be like that.
Okay. And so is Jesus in his humanity someone that we're called to be like? And yes. I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? The young brother who's here at HT will do marvelous. It was after he had preached or something. And I think I walked up to someone, said, what'd you think? And they said, well, he's not like you. I shared, there's only one me. Right. I'm not to be duplicated. right? So I think it's that same sense. And if we break it down in the human level, it helps us to understand.
Right.
When we look at the Christ, I think if we did not understand the Godness, right, I think he's enough to help us understand what it means to live right.
Absolutely.
I think he in his humanity,
Right.
in his living, he has demonstrated enough what that ought to be able to look like. Right. And somewhere, if we stop trying so hard, if we're getting close.
I think what confuses
9.
Yeah.
All right.
I think what confuses us sometimes is when we misappropriate some of the text. For example, Jesus is in John 15, I believe it is. Let's say, I think somewhere around there. He says to these guys, y'all been hanging out with me. Y'all, I felt like little boys. Y'all grew up to be like friends. I feel like we're brothers now. And in my mind, I see him stepping back, pushing them forward and saying, greater works than I have done. He said, you will do. So people say, well, doesn't that undo your limitation argument? No. I think you got to use the right word for greater. Jesus is not talking about quality. He's talking about quantity. Because as one person, here's what I'm doing. But I got 12 models. And what happens if each of you all get 12 models? And each of them have 12 models. Then won't you do greater works? And instead of harnessing that to mean whatever he can do, I'm going to do more. It's not quality. That's not a qualitative statement. It's a quantitative statement. That there'll be more of you. And I'm going to send the Holy Spirit back. It's not limited to incarnationally one body. But this incarnation is going to be a mass incarnation. I'm a singular incarnation because I also have to be a price paid, right? But one is going to be enough to pay the price for all. And
I'm going to sort of challenge it a little bit and say, as much as it is quantitative, I believe there is a qualitative dimension to that. Right? As we look at growing, touching more, and touching them in the right way, right? Because that's where that's where the quality comes in. That there is a sense of both, but how do we understand it? And that becomes a matter of interpretation, I think.
Right.
That so many of us want to stay away from. You don't interpret. You take it. This is what it is. But we can't come to a text.
No.
Without interpreting, we interpret it out of our context, our own personal context.
Yeah, you could have dogma, but dogma without context is just noise.
But somewhere there's the qualitative and the quantitative. If we understand, it's not about doing miraculous things, and it's about what you're doing and the work that you do in understanding. You can't do it all by yourself. But if you use those around you, the relational piece, that if you understand in that humanness, that Christ was relational, and his impact was greater because of the relationships, the folk he trained and the folk he sent out, because then it grew from 12 to 100, about 123,
120,
by his death, but from that time forward, what it has become, But it's also that relational piece. Somewhere there.
No doubt. I think you're 100% correct. I will tell you, I think that it is about the fact that Jesus is saying, let's not, it's not as deep as sometimes we try to confuse it to be. He said, help some people and get you some people. Get some people and help some people. Everything in Jesus' life, he's helping some people and guiding some people. Got a little small group he's guiding. They don't even get it before he leaves, but he planted in them 3 years worth, and there's gonna come a time when he comes. It's gonna make sense because they heard about the kingdom. But there's a strange verse in the 9th chapter of Luke, I think it is, and Jesus is explaining. Is it Luke or John? Anyway, Jesus explains to his disciples something. He asked the question, "What profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" He says, if y'all gonna come after me, that's what he says. He says, y'all gonna come after me, you gotta first deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. He says, take up your cross daily and follow me. And then he goes on to say, what profit a man to gain the whole world, lose soul. But he closes that text by saying that some of y'all who are standing here with me today will not taste death until you see the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And you'd be surprised how many people automatically think he's talking about heaven. He said, until you see the king. Listen, these people are standing with Jesus, like at a place. The Bible, this is not this, don't mystify this book. They're in a place, standing up, talking. He said, somebody else standing with me, not going to taste death until you see the kingdom. See the kingdom is not the same as hearing the kingdom. See as in understanding. The light comes on, understanding. And so his disciples were with him and don't see the kingdom until post-resurrection.
To the parables, right?
Yeah.
Speaking parables because hearing, you don't hear, seeing, you don't really see.
Right.
All of that.
Right.
I appreciate the conversation. And for me, it becomes, I think, and it's not complicated.
No.
But it's important, I think, that we understand the humanity of Jesus.
Absolutely.
The role, the love, and even in love, he'd be angry, right? He'd get frustrated,
right?
But it didn't lessen,
right?
The love,
right?
It's important to understand the relationships. I love it when he says, "I didn't come to condemn." Right. And somewhere in his humanity, he understood who he was. He understood his purpose.
Right.
He understood his connections, even his heavenly connections.
Right.
He understood that. And out of that, he operated, right?
Right.
But he also says, I didn't come to condemn. But be sure that everybody could be saved.
Right. Right.
So that as we look at Jesus, as we talk about Jesus, sometimes what I would say is that, you remember the little bands that they wore? Yeah, WWJD.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I say, you know what? Jesus might not do what you think he would do.
Right.
That was part of what was going on in his life.
Right.
He didn't do what the traditional Jewish community felt like he was supposed to do.
Right. Should have done. Right. Exactly right.
So, yes, sir. Thank you for joining us for What's Up With That, a podcast. I hope that there was something on this evening that was said that was a benefit. I hope that we really understand the true nature of the Christ of history, that human Jesus who ought to impact our lives daily, because in his humanity, his life was impacted on a daily basis. God bless you, and we hope to see you again as we seek to ask those questions. What's up with that? God bless you.